Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another critique of the week. So glad you could join me. It is Friday, September 26th, the last Friday in the month. Who do we have on hand? Let's see. Dr. Q is here, Steve Horrell, Kevin West, Jamie Thomas, Nancy Sabanik. We got Phil Hall, Lynn Schilling is here, Michael Antrobus, Dee Coleman, Danette Bermia is here. Patty Arbor, Winston Munn, Tara Meslick McMahon. Brin Pope is here. Had some great poems last week. We got, let's see, Dick Westheimer's here, CLAS. Sandra Fees is here. Shelley K, Cindy Guntherman. Dr. Q, Holly York. Jamal Udin. Hemet Malik is here. Great to see you, Hemet. Rachel Grieve is here. Positive Identity Project, a.k.a. Jennifer Rose. Good to see you. Heather Hay. Doug Van Hooser. Sarah Rashid Khan. Okay, great group of poets here, as always. Now, the purpose of the critique is to give that wonderful workshop experience, help people know, how others people think about their poems, and offer suggestions, advice, what works, what doesn't, how we can move things around, words that fall flat, places where our, attention wanes, places where we're most engaged, all the positive stuff, all the stuff that drifts away. And that's what we're going to share here on the Critique of the Week. Try to talk about as many poems as we can. There was a question by Sandra Fees about Sandra Fees was a poet a couple weeks ago, and she asked about having the critiques removed, and I totally forgot. It's been so long since anybody asked to have the critique removed from the archive. I forgot that we said it was a possibility, or that we said that we would on request, and so I'm removing that from the guidelines, but we still will honor that, of course, and so we can remove Sanda's if she wants to submit poems later. I think it's really completely unnecessary, though. So maybe that's something. Tons of poems have been published that have been workshopped on the Critique of the Week. I've never heard of a single one that said, "Oh, since somebody talked about it on this live stream, that now it's published and we don't want it." It really doesn't affect anything. But I was going to reply to you, Sandra, and talk about that a little bit, because I think, I don't know, if you want to be removed, we can. It's been 2 weeks now, but it's nice to leave it up too. So we'll talk about that. And I think, let's see. Yeah, so Brent Pope 2 said she submitted a revised poem from last week. Oh, she put it on. So Bryn she revised the poem and put it on. Okay. Yeah, Centerfeast says not worry about it. Yeah, it's something that I've just never actually come across anybody caring about that as far as it being published. No one's going to find it and get mad. And if they do, it's like a draft that was workshopped. It's just one of those things that's not an actual issue that people worry about. But if you're worried about it, I'm happy to cut it out. The only problem is if I cut out the segment, we lose all the comments on everybody else's poems too, because the chat is deleted if you edit the video at all. And that's the only downside to it. So it's up to you, but we can talk about it later if you want. And since nobody's asked in years about it, I'm just going to pull that out of the guidelines, and just if people ask, I'll oblige. I don't want anybody worried or upset, but I don't think it really matters. Anyway, let's take a look at we had Mary Ellen Carr. We're definitely gonna look at her poems. We've mentioned Mary Ellen. She's here a lot at the time, and she had a submission from a while ago and would like us to talk about it, so we'll do that. Also, let me see if I can find Brin's revision that she. Let's see if it's attached. It makes it more difficult to get to if it's attached to the old one, but I could probably pull it up. Let's see. And that might be fun to take a peek at while it's really fresh. So it'll be completed here. Brin here. And then attached as a message. Okay. Here's the revised one. So this is revised poem from last week. It might be fun to look at this. I got to pull it up on a different kind of file. I got to actually download it. So 1 second. Everyone else's wonder. And this was really called Stirring the Sky, if you remember that. So here's the revision from Brin. Let's take a look and see how that's gone. Let me see. File view. There we. Nope. Let's see. This one. There it is. Okay. Everyone Else's Wonder. This is an update of Brin's poem. Let me shrink this down. Sorry, I got to do a little bit of housekeeping here to make it work. Okay. Everyone Else's Wonder. Remember, we looked at this. This was stirring the sky last time. And there are a lot of great poems lately. This is another really good one too. We had some minor tweaks. Let's talk about it. This is a reworked. We never really done this before, so it might be fun. Everyone Else's Wonder is the new title. On summer nights, my father rolled the telescope onto the driveway, a machine of brass and mirrors like it had fallen from another world. Neighbors would line up to see Saturn's rings, bruises on the moon. He'd welcome them like a museum guide, name the constellations, speak low, and even a tone he saved for everyone but me. I don't know why I didn't pause for the hyphen, sorry. Yeah, let me read that again. He'd welcome them like a museum guide, name the constellations, speak low and even, a tone he saved for everyone but me. They'd lean close, take turns, their voices lifting like he gave them the night. He'd light a cigarette, adjust the focus, point to the glow of Jupiter, the spill of the Milky Way. Once he let me look. I climbed onto his lap, tucked my braids behind my shoulders. His fingers brushed the lens, the same careful fingers that marked silence into my skin. He told me not to touch. I squinted into the eyepiece. The stars blurred and broke apart. I couldn't hold one eye shut, couldn't make the cosmos appear. He sighed, dry and sharp, a sound that taught me not to breathe too loud, not to ask for another turn. The next child stepped forward. I moved to the lawn, laid back, felt the heat still trapped in the soil, sharp grass at my neck, dress clinging to my legs. I raised my feet, toes circling the dark. Look, I whispered, I'm stirring the sky. But the stars did not move. They held their breath the way I did when I heard his step just beyond the bedroom door. Behind me, laughter rose from the driveway, and the telescope kept gathering everyone else's wonder. Yeah, well, Centerfeast says, I'm loving this revision. Yeah, and Nancy Sabanek too. Yeah. Richard Lorberg loves the braid details. So the thing we didn't get last time was more about what there's a lot more to the story that we weren't getting. And this time we definitely get that story in a much more potent, powerful way, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so I really like the revision. I like that we get let in more about what's going on. Rachel Grief says, wow, a big change in the story. Yeah, I mean, that's a big shift. Desi Cochrane said this got a lot darker. And it definitely did. I mean, the last time the darkness was something that we didn't get. We could feel it there last time, but we didn't understand why. And now we definitely agree. Kimberly Gibson Tran says the ending is strong now that the story is built up. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those catches your breath a little bit. I agree with Dick Westheimer. I don't think the title is there yet. So Dick says, I tend toward titles that have a concrete image. This one seems just to summarize what the poem is about. And yeah, I agree. I still think, I think if I remember, my suggestion was try to think of something else that reminds of the father, a different story, and then maybe make that the title. Everyone Else's Wonder, repeats, it's one of the better lines from the poem, and it kind of summarizes that and gives it that direction. That's actually the last line from the poem. And I think having the title as the last line of the poem, it takes away the punch from the poem too. So I would still work on the title, but I like the poem as a whole. I think that it filling in that gap makes the poem a lot more stronger and resonant. Yeah. As Sidney Guntherman says, beautiful poem. It feels a little sinister, very powerful. A lot of pain mixed with beauty. Yeah. Yeah. Shelley K says, what about Stirring Footfalls? I think maybe just Footfalls would be a title. Yeah, it'd still work on the title. Stirring the Sky was the original title. Yeah. So I don't know. So still working the title, but I think the rest of the poem, that the story's there, and feel how much more we feel reading the poem, getting more of the story and understanding where the illusions or things are pointing to. Kimberly Gibson Trent says The Stir. Oh, this is a good one. Diana Volk says, or perhaps the title could be What You're Looking at in the Sky, a constellation perhaps. Yeah, what if the title was like Cassiopeia? Cassiopeia. On summer nights, my father rolled the telescope onto the driveway, a machine of brass and mirrors, like it had fallen from another world. Or the Little Dipper. A constellation is a great suggestion. I like that, Diana. So maybe, and that allows you to find a constellation that has some kind of mythological significance and resonance with a story too. So you can sort of go on a hunt for something like that and make it really interesting that way. So yeah, I like that suggestion a lot. Something like that, like Cassiopeia would be a great, because you want the title to be interesting and have something surprising and moving from the, that's a little bit off from the title or from the poem itself. And then we have this extra leap, like a cut in a haiku, and that makes it work. So I think that's what we'd go for with the title. Okay, so yeah, really nicely done. Thanks for sharing that, Brin. Let's take a look at, as promised, we'll go to Mary Ellen Carr next. I got to rearrange these things to do that. So hang on one second. Let me go off of this. There. And here's Mary Ellen Carr. Now, Mary Ellen has a short poem and then a haibun. So let's see. We won't read Mary Ellen's note right off the bat. Well, I guess this is fine. So for the first one, she's asking about enjambment. Are the enjambments properly placed? I struggle with line breaks, so we could talk about that a bit. And then the next one, maybe we'll look at it separately. Here we go. So it's a very short poem. Again, Mary Ellen Carr from Coram, New York. Hopefully Mary Ellen's here now. She was here the last 2 weeks. Here's her poem, Mary Ellen. Things you notice while waiting for a loved one to get out of surgery. Toilet seat guards are as unwieldy as winter hair rubbed by a balloon, and they dissolve in swirling water as quickly as faith in the bland wheat wafer on my tongue taken in the hospital chapel. Well, that's really cool. So it's a different kind of form. I think, having, and I'm not sure, I'm never sure about this aspect when people submit poems, when there's a lot of spacing around the lines. I'm never sure if that's intentional or if it's just the formatting ended up doing that for me. But, and you can always kind of look at the other and see, well, it's hard to tell, given the other poem, which way it goes. So I'm not sure, but I like the isolated nature of the lines. And there's a really stilted, kind of jarring use of the enjambment. It's not enjambment that I would usually recommend, but because it's such a short poem, and because the because the lines sort of stand alone, and there's a real tension sort of can be torqued off that because it's such a short poem, and the lines each have really interesting details. It kind of works to sort of throw you off kilter to reveal the poem slowly this way. If it was a longer poem that kept going on, I think it would get tedious, but at this length, I think it works pretty well. So things you notice while waiting for a loved one to get out of surgery. Toilet seat guards are as unwieldy as winter hair rubbed by a balloon, and they. And I normally wouldn't read it with the pauses like there, but it is interesting to see it this way. And they dissolve in swirling water as quickly as faith and the bland wheat wafer on my tongue. And so this is a really great turn. The real reason why this poem works nicely is because, we know that it's waiting for a loved one to get out of surgery. So we know the place, but we kind of forget, or at least I kind of forget. And then the movement from the swirling water to the chapel, in the hospital chapel, is really, really nice. I think it's really one of those like show don't tell concrete kind of things. So Positive Identity Project says those spaces are like the psychology of worrying about a loved one. Yeah, there's this like sort of fragmented, like the way you are when you're anxious and worried and distracted. I think it sort of captures that well with the sort of jarring nature of your thoughts then, and the way it's sort of hard to focus for too long on one thing. And so I think it really works well for this poem. Let's see. Kimberly Gibson Trent says first line would be a little stronger if we move the word winter up. Then you get 2 readings on the line. So Kimberly's saying, move this winter up. Toilet seat guards are as unwieldy as winter. Hair rubbed by a balloon. And I wonder what, it wouldn't have the same sort of jarring effect. And I think when you have something, you want to establish the way the poem is going to be structured. Like a poem is really a pattern that's sort of repeating and playing with itself. And so you want to establish the pattern, and then early on, so we get a sense of what the pattern is. And if we're going to be having these sort of jarring enjambments, then I think it's good to have it in the first line. But Kimberly is right that toilet seat guards are unwieldy as winter. Letting that be stand alone allows, it's sort of open to more possibility for what the lines are. But then you would have to move dissolve up, and they dissolve in swirling water as quickly as faith. And you could move that up, and then move the tongue up, and you would have a sort of a different experience of the poem. Personally, I think I like the poem like this, because I like that like jarring way it works. So I think I would leave it. Still, I'm trying to think of sort of suggestions. I wonder if one of the things, we like to have, of course, we talk about this all the time, about having enough grounding up front where we know where things are. But I don't know. I think it kind of pulls a little bit of the surprise nature of the moving to the chapel, and like knowing where we are. Even though it's one of those things, like I don't do this. This poem is like one of those really great examples of rules are made to be broken type things, because I think that the line breaks are very unusual, that really strong enjambment cutting between syntax so that the pronouns and stuff are hanging before what they're modifying. That kind of thing, we usually don't recommend it because it makes it jarring to read, but it works in this context. And then usually it's not good to withhold details for an emotional effect. But given that this is such a strong poem and so short and tight and concise, I wonder if getting rid of, to get out of surgery, if we cut that and the poem is just called, here, let's just slide this over so we can see it that way. If it was just things you notice while waiting for a loved one, then toilet seat guards are as unwieldy as winter hair rubbed by a balloon, and they dissolve in swirling water as quickly as faith and the bland wheat wafer on my tongue taken in the hospital chapel. And there, it's withholding it, but it's so briefly withholding it that I think it makes the poem stronger with the surprise of that hospital chapel. The revelation of that, the revealing of that, I think might make the poem a little stronger. So that's something I would suggest. Jamie Thomas says, what about Waiting Room as a title? That could work too. Petty Arbor says, took me several readings to understand that they were plastic covers. Let's see. Toilet seat guards. Toilet seat guards. So interesting. So I just immediately thought of that. So it didn't really mess with me. I mean, maybe that's one of those ones where it's like the right word. I never heard it actually referred to that, but within the context, it was those. But maybe I don't know, paper. If you added the word paper somewhere, then that would clarify that. Even though it's such a tight, concise poem, you'd want to kind of cut a word out to add that. So I'm not sure. Yeah. Holly York says just paper covers. PMB says they can just be removed. Yeah, you could. Janny McQueen says, I think we don't need the hospital chapel. I like considering it a moment and realizing where the wafer came from. Yeah, I think that's another alternative. If you want it, you could keep. I think we don't need it both places. I don't think we don't need surgery and hospital, and so it's sort of a choice, because you want to have a little bit of room for the reader, like Janny says, to be part of the poem too, and sort of make a little bit of the leap themselves. And so if you cut, you could cut surgery and keep hospital, or you could keep hospital and cut surgery, and yeah. But what I would do, and I think this is the only edit I would have, because I think it works, except for the fact that people, I guess toilet seat guards, some people, it's one of those things too. It's sort of like a, that whole yellow dress, blue dress, or whatever, black or yellow or whatever, in the Laurel and Yanni, the way that you're, what's the word for that? Is it two women or a vase thing? But there's a way that the way that you first see it sort of prejudices your perception, so then you perceive it that way for a while until you perceive it a different way. And if you happen to see toilet seat guards and think about like some other kind of guard, like a guard in front of a castle or something, then that might throw you off and then make that line confusing, even though you're not really thinking about it. So maybe toilet seat covers, and then cut the get out of surgery for me, and I think that'll make the poem really work. And an interesting poem. So I like that. Okay, let's see the other one. Yeah, an optical illusion, but there's a certain kind of optical illusion that is. Let's see. I gotta look it up because it is called a Rubin vase, and the effect is after Edgar Rubin. The visual effect. What's the name though? The foreground influenced the Gestalt psychologists. Oh, I can't remember even. It's not pareidolia. Anyway, that's enough. Let's take a look at the next poem. And I can't figure out the phrase I'm looking for fast enough. Anyway, this is a haibun. Let's see if we can squeeze this all in. Can we fit it all? Okay. The birth of agency. And as we mentioned, I think on the Rattlecast, we do, as editors, tend to read the haiku first. Because if the haiku is not good, it's not worth spending your time on the rest of the poem. Goodbye, Kai Dang Ku. Mothers choose Pampers as status symbol. Well, that's interesting. I could be a good haiku. I have no idea who Kai Dang Ku is or what the reference is. I mean, mothers choose Pampers. It sounds like a commercial. Was that a commercial like in the 80s and 90s? That kind of sounds familiar in that way. But I don't know what the reference is. There's a link here. Maybe we'll check that out later. So this is one of those, the haiku is intriguing, and maybe I'll understand and appreciate it after I read. So if this were a submission, I would read that first and be like, okay, that's interesting. Or I wonder what that means. So here's the haiku. And you shouldn't read the haibun like that, but that's just what editors do. You can't help it. The birth of agency. The cat, was he the vector and delivered it as his breath mixed with yours when licking remnants of last night's dinner from your nose? Or did it arrive atop a spider as it sucked up silent midnight tears clinging to your dark lashes? Could it be your big sister was the conduit and agency floated in on her gently blown kisses after warnings to not wake the baby when readying for school? No matter, I can see your conscious self was born today, the noise from the smooth birch rattle that has hung above you since the crocus bloomed, that has been grabbed by chubby fingers and kicked by sockless toes, stopped you today. The pause signaled a realization that, I did that. I saw the next thought spark across rapidly myelinated neurons. I can do it again. The dull tone of the bell from another touch confirmed the recognition of cause and effect. If this was the moment, if this was the moment that you became you, what were you before? Were the past months and the frequent slumber merely buying time so that the fragile body could welcome this giant idea? All the impacts you had before this, the nausea of pregnancy, the pain of childbirth, the letdown of milk with your cry, did they count? Or is this the moment to start the countdown, when you track your impact on the world and others? Will the realization of cause and your effect eventually cripple you with anxiety, scare you into complacency, burden you with guilt? Oh, little one, kick the rattle harder, solidify the connection, embody the cognizance of your power. Let it anger you to protest, energize you to revolt, and most importantly, challenge you to innovate. So goodbye, Kai Dang Ku. Mothers choose Pampers as status symbol. Let's see what this says. Open crotch pants. Kai Dang Ku? I'm not sure what that means. Let's see. Chinese, also known as open crotch trousers or split pants, are worn by toddlers throughout mainland China, often made of thick fabric. Okay. They are designed with either, but it's written like this. The child simply squats or is held by the parent, eliminating the need for diapers. The sight of partially exposed buttocks of Kai Dang Ku clad children in public spaces frequently astonishes foreign visitors who often photograph them. They've been described as being as much a sign of China as Chairman Mao's portrait of looming over Tiananmen Square. Well, that's interesting. I did not know that. And it makes sense. I think the diapers thing is kind of makes potty training a little difficult, you know? And it doesn't seem like the most natural, best way to do things probably. But that's how we do it. We do it over here. So kind of makes sense to just have kids understand, and then they probably are going on their own much sooner. Anyway, going back to the poem. Oops. Going back to the poem. Hang on. I shouldn't have clicked the link that way, I guess. Going back to the poem. So, goodbye, Kai Dang Ku. Mothers choose Pampers as status symbol. So, is this sort of are people starting to use diapers in China as a status symbol, maybe? Because it's like Western. I don't know. I'm not understanding the haiku. Maybe I'll look at the comments on YouTube. Maybe people, let's see, understand it better than I do. Yeah. So my first thought, I'll just say before I look at the comments, I guess, is I think let me silence this too. There's a lot of, hang on, just do that. There's a lot of interesting content, and it held my interest. The prose section. This is The Birth of Agency, and I think that's a really good title, given the topic there. And then, but I think it's too long, and somebody, I already noticed a comment saying maybe it could be condensed. I think maybe having a bunch of haiku in this one, it's the haibun form. There's sort of a way that the most common, just because they're the easiest to write haibun, have one prose section and then a haiku. But that's not the most traditionally useful way. I mean, that's not what Basho was doing. Haiku are just interspersed with much longer text, and that's what the tradition really was. And then even in contemporary haibun, especially the haibun editors, we didn't talk about it with Roberta, but we did at some point, and we talked about it with Lou Watts and with Rich Humans, of those other haibun editors, but they all are sort of getting tired a little bit in the same way like formal journals. I don't know if you know this, but formal journal editors kind of get tired of sonnets, and they want other stuff. They'd rather have, like the Meredithian sonnet that we had as the Rattle Poetry Prize winner, or, even villanelles are getting too old. They get more excited when they see different kinds than the typical kind. And so they all are sort of wishing to have more longer, interesting, sort of intricate things with multiple haiku in them. And so what I would suggest is trying to get a haiku in between each paragraph. Getting a whole bunch of haiku in here would be really interesting. Because I do like the content. It's interesting. This haiku, I'm not sure if I'm understanding it right, and it doesn't really stand out as strong to me. So, yeah. Let me see what the comments are saying, though, because I just might not understand. So Katie Scruggs Gallery says, seems about a baby being potty trained, a new step in autonomy. Yeah, I get that. I think the haiku, it sort of is on the same, it's not far enough removed from the topic to be like a leap. And it's sort of I don't know, it's like a news headline or something. It doesn't have that the actual experience with a haiku that we're trying to create is what in Japan is called ma, which is that sort of, maybe the sublime is the closest kind of translation to that word, but it's this sort of you want the air around, the space around, the silence around the haiku to be like deep and contemplative and make you sort of think and feel in an expansive way, where the more you like wait, the more it grows, that feeling of ma. And this doesn't really have that, because it's more of a senru type haiku, which is fine, but it's also not like, I don't know, it doesn't strike me as funny. So it doesn't have like the impact that we're sort of looking for in adding depth through haiku to me. I guess that's what I could say. Desi Cochran says, I don't see a cut in haiku, in the haiku. And maybe that's the problem. I mean, goodbye Kaidan-ku. I'm not sure, in the Wikipedia page, it was all one word. So maybe I'm missing something too in the fact that it's written out to 3 separate, but maybe it just doesn't matter, and that's just how it's transliterated. I don't know. But I thought maybe you could say that there's a cut after that, and it's like a different place. Yeah. Let me just read some more. Yeah, Tembarla said the chain of questions felt overlong. There is some stuff that could be trimmed out of here. And I agree. So it could be condensed a little and add more haiku is what I would try to do. And then Katie Scruggs Gallery says, I wish the humor came earlier. And yeah, that's true. Part of it maybe is that the humor, the seriousness of the prose doesn't allow the humor to resonate, kind of, because it is kind of a funny, it's like a senru kind of haiku, and it should be funny. Maybe it's like if there's a comic that's doing terrible and not being funny, nobody wants to follow, because he sort of laughter and comedy builds, and because there's in this very long section that's not really comedic, it's very serious. Maybe it's just not creating the right space for a funnier haiku. That's something to think about too. Yeah, but I like the title. Is one thing we haven't really mentioned, but I think there's a nice leap and sort of there's like a swirliness to that, so I think that's good. Let's see. Interesting. So Jamie Thomas says, if it's about the cycle of karma, then the haiku feels like swapping of heritage for social currency and the hollowness of that pursuit and its consequence karmically. That's really interesting. That is. Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, so those are my thoughts on it. It's kind of long to read again. I think there's stuff to condense, and I think about mixing in the haiku and just making it more consistent. One of the things on the Rattlecast, I try to get Roberta's thoughts on this, but she was talking about, or I was talking about balance. That I think it was Kat Lehman was talking about. Having the haiku sort of the weight of that, even though the prose sections sort of have a lot more words, but the words are sort of less heavy and less meaningful, word by word, less dense as far as meaning goes than the haiku. And so balancing that, and I think one haiku at the end doesn't hold up enough on the scale for this one section. And Roberta was like, I could never think of it like that because I just do it by feel. But I think it is something that you want to think about with haibun. You want to have a good sense of, because you don't want to get so far lost in the prose that you sort of forget that it's a haibun, and it loses its sort of sense of the two things going on at the same time. And so I think I would try to add other haiku and just play with them a lot. I think this is a more work in progress one than the last one, but a lot of interesting stuff here. So that would be my advice. Let me. I know there was a longer thing about questions. Let's see what this says. So Mary Ellen Carr says, this originally started as a poem with short lines with no punctuation. However, something seemed to be missing, and I thought turned it into a haibun. The prose emerged and many question marks. Too many? Most importantly, if this arrived on your desk as a regular submission, is the haiku strong enough, interesting enough to get you to read the whole thing? Thanks for the opportunity. So we talked about that. I think it's intriguing enough that I'm curious, but then it didn't really I think we need more haiku is just the bottom line, and then condense a little bit too from the prose section. I think there's a lot of good comments too, and Mary Ellen, you can read the comments here. All right, great. Let's move on to another poet. Thanks for sharing that, Mary Ellen. And next, we'll go back to the oldest poems in our queue. Got about half an hour left. Brin Pup says, is it okay to put more haiku in the story? Is that an acceptable format? And yeah, it definitely is. Like I was saying, that's what I was trying to say. I think it's one of those days when I'm not as articulate as I've been, I think. But yeah, that's what I was saying. Like having a bunch of haiku inside is not only acceptable, but it's actually the oldest part of the tradition is to have a bunch and to have a long combination. And it's the stuff that the haiku journal editors most want to see is multiple haiku. So, if you have a longer piece, definitely insert a whole bunch. And we have a bunch in Rattle that do that. Not only in that issue, but in the Tribute to Japanese Forms, issue number 47. We have some other ones. There's a Poets Respond one by, what's his name? Kenny Tanamura, who it's a very long one. And that Poets Respond one, it's about you got to read. I can't share because it's so long, but it's about visiting, I think, his family for New Year's, and there's so many haiku interspersed with that. So go check that out, Kenny Tanamura. And I think he's got a long one too about visiting Basho in that Japanese Forms issue. So there's a couple there. There were a few with multiple, including Lou Watts, I think, had multiple in his one in the haibun issue. So yeah, so definitely something to do and try to find that balance with them. All right. Next up is Durasheskumar Shah from India. And here's one poem. The title is Lone Beauty. And let's take a look. Get this more nicely situated. Okay. And so it's pasted in, but the title up at the top is Lone Beauty. So here you go. A little glow in the region of green, in the reign of green. Born a new fellow with a lot of dreams, someone different, someone new. No one understood what to do. Lone and dull while surrounded by many. The breezes were the only ones carrying her symphony. A growing beauty, shining day by day, yet still lonely, with no one to say, crossed upon me on a busy day. Her lone beauty caught my eyes. That moment brought a sweet surprise. My visit became frequent along my track. No longer alone, her growth found a better path. Since then, many seasons passed. Her growth came to a halt at last. On a visit in the break of dawn, singing in the spring breeze serene, green petals amidst the lashes of green, or purple petals amidst the lashes of green, covered by the soft mist of spring, glistening in the sunshine, I found the most beautiful flower I have ever seen. All right, so this one, when we talk about, it just comes up all the time. If you're going to rhyme, it's difficult not to get rhyme to be very sing-songy. And you want to do that by using enjambment, by rhyming across parts of speech, and by, I said enjambment across parts of speech, and I lost the train of thought. Oh yeah, and not picking your, not going to the first rhyme you think of, like surprising yourself with your rhymes, going past, because the problem is your first thought rhyme is always going to be a sort of a cliche type rhyme. It's like the first thing you think of. It's boring for us to read, and it doesn't generate you going into interesting places as you write. And so this is one of those examples where the rhyme is driving the poem, and instead of getting surprising detail, we're getting all these sort of expected rhymes that make the poem sort of stay in this general place, not interesting. So be very specific with what you're writing about, and then if you're going to use rhyme, use it as a tool to get to a surprising place, not where the easiest place to get to keep the rhyme going, because it's always going to be a boring poem when you do that. So rhyme green with serene or something like that. Try to find different words that are not green, dream, new, do, day, say, day. Like those, you got to find surprising rhymes, because we're trying to expand. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that's it. And then the details. There aren't enough details in this poem to really make it emerge. We don't know who. We don't get a real sense of these two characters. There's no specificity. It could be any time, any place, anyone. And that vagueness sort of makes the characters, the figures in the poem, just appear kind of like ephemeral shadows. They're like ghosts of people that don't really, you can't feel them and you can't connect. And so, yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran says many and symphony is not a bad rhyme. Yeah, that's a good one. I think there are some good ones here, which I should have pointed out. So thanks for saying that. Yeah. Desi Cochrane says, I feel like poems of this kind would be easy to detect by an LLM and send this kind of generic helpful feedback to save giving the same advice on Critique of the Week. Yeah, totally. That's something that would be nice to do. But, there's no way to plug in at the moment LLMs into Submittable or anything else we use. So anyway, let's move on to another poem. But it is still, having us talk about it with that, having the entire chat say the same things I'm saying before I say them especially is really helpful to people like that who normally if they get that advice from an editor, say, oh, you're just, you're a gatekeeper and you don't understand my genius. But then seeing 50 people all kind of say the same thing about it, it really helps people understand that that's the reality, not just me having, some subjective opinion about the way poems should be because I'm an evil gatekeeper. So it really helps to have this format, even if it's always the same advice or very often the same advice. All right, let's go to another poem. Next up is Beth Brown Preston from Pennsylvania. And here we go. Yeah, so here we go. This is All-American Girl, an All-American Girl for Gwendolyn Brooks. Okay. Topeka, Kansas, June 7th, 1917. Keziah. Our baby girl's birth was not an easy one. She lingered low inside my womb for days and nights, stubborn, defiant even, willfully against a world she someday would come to know. The midwife and her sister arrived, singing to comfort me sweet gospel hymns I recalled from those church Sundays. Push, push. My baby girl loosened her grip upon my womb and entered this world squalling up a storm, telling us of her own pain. David and I, we named our baby Gwendolyn Elizabeth the Tigress, the Fierce. David. I hear Gwendolyn's voice at birth coming on strong. We wanted her to own her mother's gift for music, hoped for the songs already to live inside her, to imitate the sound of Kezi playing Mozart or Haydn on our old upright piano while she floated in the waters of her belly. My papa never lived to greet his grandbaby, my father a brave man who fled his destiny of chains and slavery to join the Union Army and fight in the Civil War. Papa would have been so proud of our infant girl. Keziah. Washed clean of my blood, she nursed my swollen breast, lapped the milk of our songs, baptized in holy and sanctifying grace. At home, sleeping in my arms, she seemed to know all wisdom. Gifted of a thought deep and wide as the waters of the Kaw or the watershed of the Shungananga Creek, she was moistened with our kisses as we celebrated her born day, already knowing whom she might become, so beatific of regard, so righteous of language. Interesting. An All-American Girl for Gwendolyn Brooks. So I like this feels like a part of a much longer poem. So it's hard to know what to say about it. I like the characters, how they're developed. I like their voices being used. Love the level of detail that's being shared, but it feels like the poem didn't really go anywhere. So it feels like it's a fragment of something longer. Positive identity projects, I like being grounded in the date. And yeah, I agree. Like knowing that place, Topeka, Kansas, 1917. Yeah, and that really matters. I think Yeah. Yeah, it's Doug Van Hooser says, I like the format, but does it go anywhere? And Tom Barlow says, isn't there more? I think this is the next poem because it's a completely separate poem. But maybe it's part of a longer manuscript. It's just really hard to figure out what to say about when you get submissions like these all the time, where it's like it feels like this is a very small snippet of a longer story, and it's not excerptable as it is, you know. So to be a poem that you could publish on its own and do the work of poetry, there has to be some kind of movement, some kind of transformation. And poetry is a magic spell, and a spell is something used to change the state of something to another. You can think of it like that. And so what has changed here? What has surprised or learned? 2 characters are introduced, but then it feels like it sort of just ends because the page ended or something. I feel like I could keep going and retain its interest and tell the story, more of the story. There's some great long, novels in verse. So Abigail Cargo says this. I wonder too, is this dedicated to Gwendolyn Brooks as a poet or a person? Could there be some biographical snippets of her life in there somewhere? I was wondering that too. I don't know. Katie Strokes Gallo says, is the name above the speaker of each stanza? Yeah, I think that's it. So that's what it's sort of written with that colon like a play script. So Keziah is saying this: our baby girl's birth was not an easy one. Let's see. Jamie Thomas says, with a different title and some tightening, the first stanza feels like a poem. Well, let's read this. So, yeah. Meredith says, I assumed it was a persona poem written by her mother. It's a persona poem going back and forth between, and you can tell here because it says, David and I, we named our baby Gwendolyn Elizabeth. And so it must be Gwendolyn Brooks, I assume. And then we talk from David. We hear David next, David and I. So it's the mother and the father. The mother, Keziah, and the father, David. I hear Gwendolyn's voice at birth coming strong. So we move through, and I assume it must be Gwendolyn Brooks. Wouldn't know the date of her birth, but that's probably, if we looked it up, probably true. I think Shape of Soup said, the writing is effective, purpose unclear, and that's exactly the thing. So if it's part of a longer poem, we could get to the purpose, but right now, I've read it. I've been engaged. I find the details interesting. I love the things like, the specificity of things like the watershed of the Shunganunga Creek. She was moistened with our kisses, and things like that is really nice. But it feels like a part of something much larger, and it's hard to extract the meaning from that. Yeah. So Kimberly Gibson Tran says there was only really one tone here in this poem, nothing really complicating the honeyed birth story. And yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you said it that way, Kimberly, because it is. That's the issue, that there's no complication. You can there's a lot of ways you can think about it, but you can also think about a poem like it has to have a plot, like a novel or a film would have to have. There has to, and that requires some conflict. And that's how you get to a resolution where everybody is changed and transformed. And that's really, you condense it down and you can make it sort of a lyric movement where the plot exists in some different sort of symbolic realm, but it still has a kind of conflict and resolution. A ghazal has the first line, which is like a conflict. The second line is a resolution. A haiku has the cut across the two places, the two ways of seeing the world. And so there has to be that sense of movement. And if you have, it's like the first act of a play where, it's not even that, because of the first act of the play, you introduce the conflict that's going to be resolved later. So it's just like even before that, where you're introducing the characters. And so we have to have some kind of, if we're going to excerpt it in a way that stands alone, we're going to have some kind of conflict and movement within the excerpt. Let me read, just because I wonder if we could think about the first as a standalone, the first stanza, because somebody, I think it was Kimberly, maybe suggested that. So what if we called it Keziah, Topeka, Kansas, June 7th, 1917. Our baby girl's birth was not an easy one. She lingered low inside my womb for days and nights, stubborn, defiant even, willfully against a world she someday would come to know. The midwife and her sister arrived, singing to comfort me sweet gospel hymns I recalled from those church Sundays. Push, push, my baby girl loosened her grip upon my womb and entered this world, squalling up a storm, telling us of her own pain. Could we end there? Is that enough? I still don't think that enough has happened. Yeah. Shape of Soup says not even necessarily conflict. It can be a peaceful contrast. Yeah, I mean, it has to be a tension between something. There's so many ways to talk about it, but a poem and really any art is finding sort of the gaps between how well we understand things. So there has to be two things, and then a way that we're weaving a bridge in between the gap between those two things to be able to cross and understand and move back and forth between them, So you can think of it that way, not necessarily conflict. It's true. It's like contrast. It's like, so there has to be something there. And I'm wondering, I mean, what would you even do to make it a standalone poem? I'm not sure. So anyway, let's take a look at the other one. I think that's about all we can say about that. I guess maybe we could say too, I think the poem is its strongest when it's saying things in a voice that's a little bit distinct. So when we say, my baby girl loosened her grip upon my womb and entered this world, squalling up a storm. I love the squalling up a storm. It's a bit of a sense of an idiom there. The voice feels authentic. And then it's not working as well when we're abstracting. And like the baptized in holy and sanctifying grace, at home sleeping in my arms, she seemed to know all wisdom. Like that's not as nearly as strong as when you're using a kind of a voice that's a little more nuanced and surprising and unusual. We want to stick to that. So that's a key too. Try to find the places where you're not generalizing, where you're being specific, like the Shunganunga Creek, and where you're using sort of fresh, interesting language and not sort of generalizing and summarizing type language. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And maybe that's all we can say about this. Michael Antropa says, compare Kevin Young's Crowning. I'm curious. I'm not familiar with that poem. If I can pull it up, maybe we'll read it. Because it would be, I feel like I haven't done a great job of explaining. Is this going to lock me out because I'm not subscribed? Oh, it's just going to let me. Okay. Well, this is courtesy of The New Yorker, one of my 3 free articles this month or whatever. Let me put it on the screen here. Let's read Crowning by Kevin Young. This is an older poem from 2009, from The New Yorker, though. Crowning. Now that nothing means nothing, now that you are more born than being, more awake than awaited, since I've seen your hair deep inside mother, a glimpse, grass in late winter, early spring, watching your mother's purse, throbbing, purpled power, her pushing you for 1 whole hour, 2, almost 3, almost out, maybe never, animal smell and peat, breath and sweat and mulch matter, and at once you descend, or drive, or driven by mother's body, by her will and brilliance, by bowel, by wanting in your hair, peering as if it could see, and I saw you storming forth, taproot, your cap of hair half in, half out, and wait, hold it there, the doctors say, and she's squeezing my hand, her face full of fire, then groaning, your face out like a flower, blood bloom, crocus into hair, into air, shoulders and the long cord still rooting you to each other, to the other world, into this life among us living. Oh no. Is that the end? Anyway. The cord cut like an iris, pulsing, then you wet against mother's chest, still purple, not blue, not yet red, no cry, warming now opening, your eyes midnight, blue in the black dawn. Is that actually the end, or does it keep going? Anyway, yeah. And there's a great, I think I'm going to have to hang on 1 second. I'm going to look it up somewhere else. Maybe it's, let's see. Do we have? Okay, I was just worried that wasn't the end. But this is from the Library of Congress now. and we see that fade out was just sort of, I guess it's a poem happens to be as long as the New Yorker lets you have for free or whatever, or that one is anyway. We'll look at this one instead. So in this one, we get the descriptions of where we're going, which are great, and there's a real intensity to it. There's a sense of playing with language, of all that kind of poetic voice and stuff, and but as we move, as we move down, there's the tension of sort of watching it happen. And then what we get is I cut like an iris, pulsing, then you wet against mother's chest, still purple, not blue, not yet red, no cry, warming now. So there's the will the baby survive type thing, like that tension and fear going on. Now opening your eyes, midnight blue in the blue-black dawn. And then all the weight and the importance of that blue in the blue-black dawn, which is a great ending. But see how there's a movement there? Does that make sense? I hope so. But excellent poem, yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, anyway. Yeah, so good example. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. Okay, now let's do... Oh, there's a second poem here, too. Let's take a look at the second poem. A Dream. And this is labeled like it's page 26. So this is like the next, I think, a manuscript, and this is the next poem in. Again, this is Beth Brown Preston. Here we go, A Dream. And maybe we'll get more a sense of story. It could be one of those books that works, as a whole, but you can't really extract some of it as an individual poem. We'll see if there's a sense of movement maybe between the two poems too, if there isn't something going on in this poem itself. A Dream. Where the snow blinding white lay across the field so thick and deep we could step thigh high into a drift, and the sharp red glint of a redbird's wing flashed above our bowed heads. Or while jogging up the mountain road one night during spring thaw, our eyes barely perceived that dark place at roadside where a grisly she-bear spied our footfall from the shadows. Up the mountain path to our cabin nestled on a hillside where all the simple dreams of life came true. On the wood stove fire a kettle warmed to a shrill whistle while the wind circled tornadoes among the leaves, and where we watched very still through the open doorway as the black she-bear crouched on hind legs beside the creek teeming with trout scooped out the helpless fish, its blue gills trembling with death. Where you stripped me naked in the chill, wrapped my shivering body in your heavy lumberjack shirt and a ragged flannel blanket. Too frozen to make love, we brewed tea. Cracked teacups filled with Earl Grey, the comfort of warm liquid spilled onto our china saucers. Our souls came to reside in those woods, to grapple in the silence of growing things. The trees added each other to our own brief lives, where no one knew what secret we were withholding from those below in the valley, more broken, who dared not dream. We were huddled together in the night beyond speaking. A Dream. So again, I think similar but not as pointed, I guess, is the feeling here, where it's just wonderful language, and this is much more condensed, but really great use of concrete images. It really paints the scene. We're really there. Good use of the rhythms and all of that, kind of all the poetic craft elements. But then my thing is, what are we left with? And it feels like if we're building characters and we know who these people are throughout a whole book, then it works to extract it. But it's hard not knowing a lot about the we to feel something from this to me, Yeah, Mark Greener says, nice language needs a point. Yeah. And thanks for pointing that. So Cindy Guntherman says, I like the details of this, but I'm wondering what secret. Yeah, I meant to come back to that. So thanks for sharing that. Where was that? Where no one knew what secret we were withholding from those below. That's the thing. We don't know what the secret is that I'm withholding, or that we're withholding from those below. And because we're not let into that, it feels like we don't know what's going on in the poem. And if it's part of a broader text where we get the story throughout the entire book and we know who we are and what the secret is, then having that context makes it work. And one of the distinctions, which I haven't made in a while, is between a public and a private poem. And what happens in books like this is that they're private poems within the book, and only the collection as a whole is public. And by that I mean, by a public poem, I mean something that has the context and everything provided within the poem itself, that anybody can experience the emotional effect of it. You don't need to know anything beyond what's in the words. And sometimes it happens where the poem is private to the book, where you need the context of the poems around it to even understand or appreciate it. And then there's really nothing we can do as a journal, as a magazine, to publish the poems individually. We could publish the book as a whole, but it's hard to have that stand alone. And I think that's the issue here. It was a bigger issue even in the last poem. Katie Scruggs Galloway says, I love the intimacy that comes in the middle around shivering body. I could feel more invested in the heavy setting above if that intimacy was set earlier. Yeah. Nancy Sabanek says, title The Secret, then give a clue. And that's a good suggestion, actually. If we could lead us, even if it's not included in the book, because it's not necessary with the context of the poems around it. If we can include, we can change the title for if we try to publish them individually, and have more context included in the title, or an epigram, and so there's that too. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I imagine this is a loving couple who lives in love in the woods. Their secret side thing is probably murdering people. It could be. Yeah. Patty Arbor says, I decided she was pregnant from the last poem, I guess. S.C. Johnson says, sometimes poems encourage you to bring something to the poem. Sometimes they demand you do work the author should have done in the text. Out of context, I worry this is the second. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, and Rachel Grieve says, I've definitely written imagistic poems like this and then didn't know what to do with them. Yeah. Well, if it fits in a manuscript, and maybe, they can add up to something more than they are alone. Yeah, I mean, imagine, I don't know what we could call the title that would make it work, but imagine a title, The Dream of yada, 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 The Dream of something, something, something. And then that something, something, something would give us some of the context that's missing to really appreciate the poem. If it was like Bonnie and Clyde's dream as they sleep in the back of the of the car or something, the getaway car. I mean, how much that would change. Where the snow is blinding, white lay across the field, so thick and deep we could step thigh high. If it suddenly becomes that, the whole poem has a whole layer of meaning and we can appreciate it, So it could just be the title it differently when sending the poems out individually, and then we can appreciate them and switch the title back when you put it in the book. You see poems all the time. Usually it's because the poet decided a different title was better after they published it and revised it since the magazine publication. But you see all the time, first appeared in Prairie Schooner, originally published as A Dream, and so you can change it back to the title that's less telling when you don't need to be telling in the context of the book too. So keep that in mind. Let's see. Doing for time. Yeah. Okay. I think that's, yeah. Any other comments that I should pass along? Michael Antrobus says, maybe go read World of the Future We Thirsted by Naomi Shihab Nye. It has a similar structure. Kimberly Gibson Trans says, title idea, Getting Away with It. Yeah. So there's that. But really nice. I mean, I don't really have any complaints about, or improvements to suggest. I thought maybe, we have time. Maybe we'll look at it. We haven't really looked at poems on that level today as much. Let's look at it line by line. A dream where the snow blinding, White lay across the fields so thick and deep we could step thigh-high into a drift, and the sharp red glint of a redbird's wing flashed above our bowed heads. I don't know why I say bowed. So really nice opening. I mean, it really sets us there. Something sort of unusual happens. We do know it's a dream, so it's sort of interesting. Or while jogging up the mountain road one night during spring thaw, our eyes barely perceived that dark place at roadside where a grizzly she-bear spied our footfalls from the shadows. So, and again, really great rhythm to that. Nice detail. It's really nicely done. Up the mountain path to our cabin nestled on a hillside where all the simple dreams of life came true. Now here's a place, where all the simple dreams of life came true. We could add some details about who these figures are, who the characters are in this poem. Where she did this and he did this, or you did that. We could add that. We don't know who. There's a we, so we assume it's two people. We don't know which one's doing the thinking or talking. Is it really two people talking and thinking in unison? I don't think so. But it's we the whole time. We could break out and have an I and a you in there too, and tell more of the situation. So we have some of that context. That's a place you could do it really easily. There's you could slip in the words there. And where we watched very still through the open doorway as the black she-bear crouched on hind legs beside the creek teeming with trout, scooped out the helpless fish, its blue gills trembling with death. There is a way. Somebody mentioned that they're long sentences and they kind of run on and could use some punctuation. And there should technically be scooped out the helpless fish. There should be a comma there. Its blue gills trembling with death. But I like the breathless way that the poem pushes you and pushes you forward. I think it kind of works. This is actually one where I would even consider, and it doesn't really work because it's within the confines, I think, of a longer manuscript, and you wouldn't want to do it with one poem and not others. But you could. This is a good candidate for not having punctuation in poems, I think, given that there's that impulse that sort of it wants to push the language farther than it should, with these detailed, interesting descriptions. And it sort of feels like it doesn't want punctuation, and I think you could probably get away with it given how it's written. But anyway, where you stripped me naked in the chill, wrapped my shivering body in your heavy lumberjack shirt and a ragged flannel blanket. Too frozen to make love, we brewed tea, cracked teacups filled with Earl Grey. So this is the first time I was realizing this was a more modern poem, a more modern setting. I was still thinking or wondering if it was the couple before. The comfort of a warm liquid spilled onto our china saucers. Our souls came to reside in those woods. And so this is the kind of thing we're talking about in the last one especially, but this one too, not having a sense of movement. And the difference between our souls came to reside in those woods, which is this sort of summarizing statement. What if the next line was a but, but our souls came to reside in those woods? The difference between, that's the contrast, and then having that something to push off of in a different direction is the sense it's kind of missing. And then if we went into why it's unusual that our souls came to reside there, you could have a sense of movement. And it's that kind of those words like but or because. Our souls came to reside in those woods keeps it in the same spot kind of, and that's why it doesn't go anywhere also. To grapple in the silence of growing things, the trees added each a year to the trees added each a year to our own brief lives, where no one knew what secret we were withholding. And another thing too, I'm confused about this is that it's a dream, and at the beginning there were two possibilities, right? There was where the snow was blinding, and blah blah blah, and the red, that was one dream, and then there's an or, so it's like another dream, or while jogging up the mountain. And then so my reading was that it continues the same dream the whole time. It hasn't broken out of that. So I don't know. But if it was like, but we woke up and then going into what was actually there, I mean, that's an obvious sense of having some change going on. That's a possibility. But anyway, the trees added each a year to our own brief lives, where no one knew what secret we were withholding from those below the valley, more broken, who dared not dream, where we huddled together in the night beyond speaking. And why are we beyond speaking? So it raises a bunch of questions at the end that it doesn't, instead of answer, and it leaves us sort of wanting there to be more poem, but it's not there. I think that's just how it ends up. Let's see. Just trying to look at the other comments. Brin Pope says that line, "Its blue gills trembling with death," is disturbing to my ears, so perhaps it's doing something right. Yeah, it definitely, there's some great lines in here. Yeah. Anyway, okay, we're going to wrap that up, so thanks so much for doing that. I think that's about it. Let's see. Oh, Katie Scruggs Galloway says this, "Tim, do you have any advice for organizing a collection of poetry when the poems don't exactly relate to one another? I'm not sure how to home standalone poems." Yeah, I mean, that's always a difficulty. You know, I mean, one thing, if you read poems, you'll see the ways that they do. If you like sort of lay them out, read them side by side and see like, hey, maybe I'm fixating on more than I thought I was fixating on. You know, I didn't realize that I had this obsession I kept writing about, even if it's like part of the poem. And a lot of times you can feel that, but you do. I mean, a book of poems is, you've written enough poems that have usually some kind of way they connect to each other. And even if that connection is like a stylistic connection, there's some unifying thing usually, and some poems just don't fit. You know, that's just the way it goes. Like Taylor Mali with his chapbook. It was the second chapbook we published. I can't remember what it's called. The Wedding Stone. And a really powerful, sad chapbook. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was reading a comment. The Wedding Stone, Taylor Mali, generally sort of a positive, he writes so much about being a teacher. He's got that famous teacher's poem. He writes about a lot of his family and his father. There's a lot of humor going on as a slam poet. But then he had this experience where his wife committed suicide. And he had, sort of a trickle of a few poems that would come out about that every now and then. And they wouldn't fit in his books because it didn't make sense to include those poems there. And eventually he had like 15 or 20 and turned that into a chapbook. So that's kind of what you usually have to do, is just see where your themes and things are going and set them aside until you write more poems about it. And even if it's just, it's not enough for a whole book, it can be enough for a chapbook. So there's that too. As Brin Pope says, don't forget the like button. Twice as many people watching live as like, even as I ramble on longer than I should. So thanks for that. Let's see. Yeah. And I missed this comment too. Beth Brown Preston says, that was the last poet, "What kind of relationship can a poet develop between metaphor and meter in their poems?" Between metaphor and meter. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, but it's an interesting one. I mean, I don't know. I'll have to think more about that. But thanks for sharing that, Beth. Again, that was Beth Brown Preston from Pennsylvania, sharing those two poems. Thanks to everybody who shared poems today. Now, coming up on the Rattlecast. So I should say, too, the second half of our Persona Poems episode on the Poetry Space, which Katie Dozier and I do. It's her show. I co-host along with some of the regulars you see on here, called The Squad. We got like Richard Westheimer. I don't know why I called him Richard. Dick Westheimer. We've got, Brian O'Sullivan is there, Joe Barca. So we all sit around and talk about a topic. Sometimes we have guests. The last one was the Persona Poems, and that just came out. Find that on Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff. Let's see. And then coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be Isabella Descendi. Now, Isabella was a finalist for the Rattle Poetry Prize back in 2023. She had a few, I think it was 3 really wonderful poems in her 4-poem submission. And it was just clear that this was going to become a great book. And now it is a great book, Someone Else's Hunger. So she's going to be joining us, sharing that book on Rattlecast number 311. The prompt for this week was to write a persona poem that includes the word prompt. So a little nod to the prompt lines there. Write a persona poem that includes the word prompt. That is your prompt for this week. Isabella Descendi is the guest. Rattlecast number 311, Monday, September 29th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.